If you are sympathetic to the cause, hit the notification bell, like and subscribe, even join our channel, and you can, of course, study the Red Judaism website. If you have any questions, please send an email to redjudaism@gmail.com, and I will do my best to reply to you. This particular podcast is on Jesus' DNA. So that title is really just to get you interested for a start. We're talking about the DNA on the Shroud of Turin. So many of you might be thinking, well, that's not Jesus' DNA. But if you've been following the research which has been done on the Shroud of Turin since the 1980s, you realize that there's a lot of interest in it right now because it really does date from 1st century Palestine, 1st century Judea to be specific. And there is DNA which has been extracted from that shroud. There is also a 3D image which has been extracted from the shroud, and a lot of evidence is basically showing that this is not a work of art. This is actually the impression of a real human being who was crucified with all of the marks which are described on the body of Jesus from the gospel account. So either it's somebody who was crucified in exactly the same way in the same century as Jesus of Nazareth, imitating Jesus of Nazareth's crucifixion, i.e. some early Christian, some early Jewish Christian who believed in Jesus and was punished in exactly the same way because he refused to renounce Jesus, for example. That's one possibility. Or it is the body, it's the shroud which wraps the body of Jesus Christ himself. Some evidence which sort of suggests that it couldn't have been just a disciple or a follower of Jesus who was crucified in exactly the same way, is that there is no record of any particular disciple or follower who was crucified in exactly the same way. And considering we have such extensive records of all sorts of different disciples and followers who were crucified in different ways, or killed in different ways, it would be surprising that nobody mentioned a particular disciple or follower who was crucified in exactly the same way. That's a surprise for a start, considering how much evidence and records we have concerning all the other followers who were killed and crucified for being his followers. So that's number one. Number two is that there is actually a kind of radiation blast from this shroud, which is really quite curious because the light came from inside the body, causing an exposure on the shroud. So you have to think to yourself, what kind of believer was it? If it was a believer who was crucified in exactly the same way as Jesus of Nazareth, what kind of believer was it that had this sort of brilliant light burst from inside their body to create this image on the shroud? So pretty saintly person, to say the least. It doesn't happen to all of us, so it must have been somebody who was incredibly saintly, at the very least. And those two things are quite interesting. I mean, looking at radiation patterns and signatures on the shroud is one really fascinating thing to look at in itself. But I think the strongest evidence that this shroud wasn't of a disciple who was a follower of Jesus, but was of probably the Messiah himself, is the DNA evidence. So I'm going to show you a table. I'm going to share with you now a table showing you the types of DNA which are extracted from the shroud. Okay, so this is one thing we've got to look at here for a start to get a basic understanding. DNA on the shroud. So this is the human MT DNA haplogroups found on the Turin shroud. That might not mean anything to you at this point, but by the end of this video, it will mean an awful lot to you. And what we've got here is 38 types, 38 haplogroups on this shroud. Now, those of you who are interested in DNA and understand what a mitochondrial haplogroup is for a start, will be thinking to yourself, hold on a second, what do you mean there are 38 mitochondrial haplogroups on this shroud? How can that possibly be? Well, there are two options. One is that it was handled by 38 different people, or at least some of those people, maybe more people, who had the exact same haplogroup as each other, or 38 different haplogroups, or that at least minimum 38 people handled this shroud and left their DNA on this shroud, because there are 38 distinct mitochondrial DNA haplogroups on the shroud. But the more astounding thing is that this is 38 haplogroups from the blood of the shroud. So that is more difficult to explain. In fact, impossible to explain. I mean, some people could say, right, okay then. Well, basically what we've got here is a pot of blood, which has got 38 different people's blood in there, and somebody used that blood to paint a picture on the shroud. Except that all the other evidence shows exactly that that's impossible. That's not what happened. This is actually the blood of a human being. It's human DNA on this shroud. But the blood on the shroud is only human in its appearance, because no human being would have that many different types of DNA inside of them. It's completely alien. It's completely alien. So it's the same DNA building blocks, but the haplogroup appears like a human haplogroup, which would be, well, it appears like 38 different human haplogroups, at least, rather than actually being one human being's haplogroup. Just to say the least, this is not possible on this planet. It's not something from this planet. So it's a different kind of DNA. It appears human, but it actually is equivalent to 38 different people. Now, to try and explain this more, I've put it into a little color chart here on an Excel spreadsheet. And I'm going to try and explain what these different 38 different haplogroups are. So I've got L first, followed by M, followed by the R group, followed by the H group, and at the bottom we've got the U group. So these are the different groups of haplogroups. Each of the DNAs, the maternal DNAs found on the shroud, show that. And this is interesting. It's maternal DNA we're talking about here. It's not paternal DNA. This is only from his mother. Okay, this would be the mother aspect. So the maternal DNA on the shroud fits into just a few major groups. 1 is L, 2 is M, 3 is R, 4 is H, and 5 is U. So there are 5 major groups into which these 38 maternal DNAs fit. Now, this is a good argument against anybody who thinks that Jesus' maternal DNA came from his mother Mary. Because if that was the case, it would mean that Mary herself had 38 different haplogroups in her and therefore wouldn't have been human either. And she would have taken her DNA from her mother, meaning that her mother wouldn't have been human either. And there would be also a relationship with her cousin Elizabeth, who wouldn't have been human either, and basically going all the way back to so many Jewish mothers that it would be saying that basically most Jewish mothers were not actually human. So it's not real to think like that. Mary's parentage is not in question. Nobody questioned that. Nobody doubted that. She was the daughter of her parents. And there would have been plenty. She had relatives. There are cousins. Cousin Elizabeth is mentioned. There are family members, and she was from a particular family. All those people are giving her lineage. So the idea that this is coming from Mary is just kind of ridiculous, because it would mean that this would be a normal signature amongst Jewish women today. But it's just not a normal signature for any human woman or male. It's just not a normal human signature. It is human DNA. It's recognizably human, but it's just not from any particular. There's no person on the planet ever that has this particular haplogroup. This is extremely unique DNA. So let me try and explain more about these 38 groups. So the first 2 in the group I've put in, they're actually labeled L, and I put them in purple here, L and L3. This is perhaps the most astounding thing. Okay, L3. I'm going to help by showing a little tree, okay, of how this works. This is from Wikipedia. There's another picture here. This is quite a good picture, which shows how these haplogroups work. So you've got L0, LF, LK, LD, LB, L1B, L1C, L5, L2, L6, L4, L3B, L3F, L3C, L3D, L3E, L3I, L3X, and L3H. L3 is extremely ancient. It has descendants, and it's present in Africa. Okay, so this is what we're looking at here. Let me try and make this even bigger, so it's a little bit bigger for us to see. Yeah. All right. So the color for L, the L haplogroups are present in Africa. Okay. And the L3 haplogroups, which is one we're talking about here, L3, this one, is the ancestor of all of these haplogroups. Okay, so it's the ancestor of all of these different haplogroups which are present in Africa. So part of the DNA on the shroud is the ancestor of all the people in Africa. Okay, and people outside of Africa do also have this too, but mostly it's the people in Africa that have this group. The other odd thing is that he's also belonging to L0. L0 goes back to here. There is another word for L0, which is also on Wikipedia, because there are many branches of L0, but the ancestral L0 has a specific name. I'll show you that, and it's actually known. It's mitochondrial Eve. It's the mother of all human beings, L0. It's a branch of exactly mitochondrial Eve. So it's basically either Eve herself or Eve's daughter. Or Eve's sister. So that's another odd thing about the haplogroup. You have L and you have L3. This L is so ancient that it can't be grouped into any of the groups known today. It's such an ancient L, it can't be grouped. It's not even L0, it's L. It's literally mitochondrial Eve. It's the ancestor of all humans. So one of the haplogroups on the shroud is the ancestor of all humans. Okay, that's very interesting. Maternal ancestor of all modern humans. L3 is all of the people in Africa. I'll just explain that again in case I didn't explain it very well. Somebody's whispering in my ear that wasn't explained very well. L up here, you've got L1, L3 is actually down here. It's a branch of L1, but it's also got L0 is the second branch. When you put L0 and L3 together, I didn't explain this properly earlier. I'm so sorry. The ancestor of it all is L. That's mitochondrial Eve. That's what we've got on the shroud here. That's what this L is here. We put that up here so we can see again on this section. This one we're talking about here, this L, is the ancestor of all modern humans. But this was on the shroud, which was the blood of the shroud, which was found maybe it traces back to first century Palestine. So that's a very interesting thing. Okay, so I hope I managed to explain it much more clearly the second time around. Sorry about that. Waffling on about L0 and L1, they go back to one common ancestor. L is the common ancestor of them all. It's common ancestor for all humans.